Welcome to the CHPS Back in Massachusetts webinar. I'm Bill Orr, the Executive Director of the Collaborative for High Performance Schools. Thank you very much for joining us today. We have a full agenda for the day, and I'd like to start off by reviewing it. We're going to go over a brief introduction of CHPS and the history of CHPS in Massachusetts. I will be doing that. Then we'll be covering the new Massachusetts School Building Authority policy. We'll be going into a brief overview and introduction to NE-CHPS. Then we'll delve into more detail in terms of a comparison between the new NE-CHPS criteria and the previous Massachusetts CHPS criteria that was in use for MSBA funded projects from, I think it was 2010 through 2014. We'll talk about some other CHPS updates in terms of how the CHPS Verified program has been tweaked and improved. We'll talk a little bit about why to choose CHPS for your next MSBA or other Massachusetts or Northeast Schools project. And then we'll have about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So if you have questions along the way, feel free to use the chat feature of the GoToWebinar, and we will be monitoring those questions. And then at the end, we will review the questions that have been received and then answer any additional questions that you may have. At the tail end of the webinar, we will be premiering a brand new CHPS video, which is a virtual tour of Southeastern Regional Vocational Technical High School in Easton, Massachusetts. It's a major renovation project, and this video is a companion to a music video that you can view on YouTube. So that's a little bonus feature that we have for you today. So introducing our panelists. As I mentioned, I'm Bill Orr, the Executive Director for CHPS. Originally, Stephanie Mason, the Technical Programs Manager for CHPS, was going to be presenting a majority of the content today. Unfortunately, she's under the weather, so I'm stepping in for Stephanie, but anticipate working with Stephanie in the weeks and months ahead. I'm joined by Carl Brown with the Massachusetts School Building Authority. He's a senior architect with MSBA, and he will be presenting on the new MSBA policy. And then finally, I'm joined with Carolyn Sarno-Goldthwaite. She's with Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships in Massachusetts and works regionally, and she's also the brand new chair of the CHPS National Board of Directors. Now, a little bit about CHPS. Our overall mission is to make every school an ideal place to learn. That includes public schools, charter schools, private schools. That includes all kinds of new school construction, renovations, existing schools. Our priorities, and you'll hear about this throughout the course of the presentation, are first of all a healthy and productive learning environment, basically designing the schools with the students, with the children in mind. Secondly, to conserve natural resources, including energy, water, and waste, basically anything that has a utility bill associated with it. And then finally, protecting the environment, reducing environmental impact, basically making a smaller environmental footprint for the school. CHPS is a national nonprofit organization. We were originally founded in California in 2002, or incorporated in 2002. We became a national organization in 2008, and we'll talk a little bit about how that dovetails with the evolution and history both in Massachusetts directly and the Northeast region. CHPS provides a broad array of tools and resources for K-12 schools. We'll be primarily touching on the CHPS criteria today, but there are other webinars, and you can basically visit the CHPS website to take advantage of those other tools and resources. CHPS is a membership organization. If you're not already a member of CHPS, there are a variety of benefits and services to our CHPS members. Most notably, if you are a school district, you can actually join CHPS for free and get all of the benefits that a corporate member would otherwise receive. As I mentioned, today's presentation is really going to focus on the CHPS criteria for Massachusetts and the Northeast region. But CHPS is actually, the CHPS criteria is actually now a national program. There is a version of CHPS that is now available in all 50 states with the release of what we call US CHPS. Massachusetts CHPS and now Northeast CHPS are part of what I would call the original 13 colonies of CHPS, which are states that have a custom version of the CHPS criteria that was developed over the last 12 years. Now, moving a little bit into the specific history of Massachusetts, CHPS is not only, or Massachusetts is not only a regional pioneer along with the Northeast, but also a national leader in terms of the overall CHPS program. In 2004, Massachusetts originally licensed the CHPS Best Practices Manual, and the original version of Massachusetts was released in 2006. Continuing with that leadership role, in 2009, Massachusetts CHPS, the second edition, became the first version of CHPS to be a pilot of what became known as the CHPS National Core Criteria. I'll talk briefly about that a little bit more. And then finally, with the update of the CHPS National Core Criteria and the Northeast CHPS criteria, basically a decision was made and vetted through the Massachusetts School Building Authority to adopt Northeast CHPS as an option within Massachusetts going forward. And we'll talk more about why that is in the next few minutes. Now, I mentioned the CHPS National Core Criteria. It's both a framework and the benchmarks for CHPS nationally, starting in California and Massachusetts and Northeast and Washington State. Each of the versions of CHPS were very different in terms of the organization, in terms of the structure, in terms of the point thresholds and prerequisites. And so beginning in 2009 with the Massachusetts 2009 update, and then bridging into the release of Northeast CHPS, basically we now have basically a national framework and a lot more standardization associated with the overall layout of the CHPS criteria, at the same time preserving local flexibility. And we'll talk more about what that looks like later in the presentation. Now, in terms of the overall impact of CHPS in Massachusetts, currently as we speak, we did a new tally yesterday, and we have 60 completed CHPS school projects in Massachusetts. Of those, 54 of those are CHPS verified projects, which are the third-party verified projects. That's the most completed CHPS verified projects of any state in the country. In addition to that, there are 6 completed CHPS verified leader projects in Massachusetts, which again is the most verified leader projects of any state in the country, and that was largely driven by the previous MSBA policy that provided additional reimbursement based in part on achieving that CHPS verified leader level. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Carl Brown, and he will present on the new Massachusetts School Building Authority policy. So I'm just going to go to the next slide, and Carl, feel free to jump right in.
Okay, thanks, Bill. So I have 3 slides here, and I can go through these in detail if you like. So as Bill mentioned, we have been using CHPS since 2006 with the 2006 version. NE-CHPS, and then in 2010 we adopted the new 2009 version of NE-CHPS, and then in 2014, about a year ago, updated our policy to allow projects to register with LEED, and they had been using LEED as well since 2010, and now we've just more recently changed our policy again to allow projects to register with NE-CHPS or LEED for schools. We've had I think a total of 34 projects that are in the system, 70 projects under the 2010 policy, and then more recently 9 projects since 2014. In 2014, we with the addition of the new V4 of LEED and the version 3 of NE-CHPS, we went back to look at our policy to try to benchmark the 2 criteria to see if we could have a consistent level of achievement for projects, whether they register with LEED or with CHPS. So we looked at the Energy Conservation Code, the new code 2010 or 2012, and the 2010 version of ASHRAE, and then we took our evaluations out to the local architects here in Boston and Massachusetts and got feedback from architects, engineers, the owners, project managers, superintendents, principals, and buildings operations people, and came up with what we thought was an equitable standard of criteria, whether it was with CHPS or with LEED. And if you can go to the next slide, Bill. There we go. So what this graph does, it focuses on the energy conservation portion of both LEED and CHPS. And this was a very critical issue a year ago, because at the time Massachusetts had just adopted the new version of the Energy Conservation Code, the 2012 edition. And at the same time where there was discussion about adopting a newer version of the Stretch Energy Code, and so we were looking very hard at the levels of energy efficiency and trying to benchmark them across one criteria for all projects. And jump in, anybody, if you want to ask questions about this. But the graph on the left shows the new version of LEED for Schools, version 4, and the graph on the right shows the 3rd edition of NE-CHPS. The part in gray is critical because that's the part that is required as a prerequisite, and you can see that the new version of LEED for Schools requires as a prerequisite exceeding the building code by 5%, and that's for new buildings. The NE-CHPS version 3 requires 10% above the Energy Conservation Code, and by the way, that's the 2012 version of the IECC. And so in order to adopt NE-CHPS, we upped the minimum requirement for both systems so that you exceed the building code by 10%, and that's a prerequisite for all projects that are funded by the MSBA. Whether they get the additional reimbursement or not, they're required to exceed the new Energy Conservation Code by 10%, which I think is very doable. In order to receive 2% additional reimbursement, the projects have to exceed the Energy Conservation Code by 15%. And that's sort of, well, you can see by the chart that LEED doesn't use odd numbers, and so it's 16% for new buildings, 14% for ad reno, and then on the northeast side it's an interpolation of 9 points, which is somewhere between 10 and 20 or 15% above the new Energy Conservation Code. And so the point here is that all projects that are funded through MSBA will exceed the building code by the base level, and then obviously 15% for the additional reimbursement. And if you go to the next slide, please, Bill. So on the left, now this is taken from a board memo, which was we had on the left the current policy, and on the right the proposed policy. With the adoption of this policy, this becomes the new policy, obviously. So what we call proposed is now current, as required. So the old policy on the left, we use strictly LEED V4. For no additional reimbursement, a project had to achieve certified or 40 points. And now under the new policy, we had to increase that so that they achieve 3 points in energy atmosphere credit, optimized energy performance. Again, that takes it up to the bottom prerequisite of Northeast CHPS, which is verified 110 points for new, 85 for addition, including 6 points in the EE prerequisite number 1. Obviously, as a prerequisite, that's required, but it still gives 6 points for that achievement. To receive the additional 2% reimbursement, we use the same standard for LEED before. It's silver or 50 points, including 6 points for EA credit, energy atmosphere credit optimized energy performance, which is again is about 15% above code, or using Northeast CHPS, 9 points, which is 15% above code as well. So using either system, you're going to be achieving basically 15% above code to achieve the additional reimbursement. And I just wanted to add that since we started giving out additional reimbursement, we've given a total of about $96 million, and that represents the 2% additional reimbursement through MSBA funding, averaging just over about $1 million per project. And I think that's it, Bill, unless anybody has any questions.
Okay, moving on. So it looks like I was temporarily muted. I'm back on the air. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Carolyn Sarno-Goldthwaite, and she will give you an overview of Northeast CHPS.
Great, thanks, Bill. We thought maybe you were, Carl had left you speechless with his update. So thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. As Bill said, I'm Carolyn Sarno-Goldthwaite, and I am wearing 2 hats today. Not only am I the chair of the board of directors for CHPS, but I'm also with an organization called NEEP, Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships, here in Massachusetts. Those of you that are not familiar with us, we're a regional organization. We're actually one of 6 RIOs, as designated by the U.S. Department of Energy to provide technical support and guidance to state agencies. We span all 12 states in the Northeast in Mid-Atlantic. So if you want to go to the next slide, Bill. So being a regional entity, we got together a group of regional stakeholders. So as you saw the history from Bill and what Carl provided for you, talking about how CHPS really came to be born here in Massachusetts. Back in 2004, NEEP got together regional stakeholders, and predominantly they were stakeholders from the New England, New York, and New Jersey states to get together to talk about how we could improve the efficiency and the health in the building stock of our school environment. And what came from that discussion is that we really needed a criteria and a pathway forward for building healthy, energy-efficient, high-performance schools. So NEEP, as a nonprofit, purchased a license because Massachusetts, through what was then called the Mass Tech Collaborative, and New York, through NYSERDA, had purchased their own license. NEEP secured a license from CHPS in 2006 to develop this regional criteria to help support school construction in the other New England states. So those of you, and many of you work across state lines, probably are familiar with Northeast CHPS and the fact that it is required for all school construction and substantial renovation projects in the state of Rhode Island. And it's also what is used in New Hampshire, and there's a few schools also in Vermont that are using the Northeast CHPS criteria. So we adapted the CHPS criteria with working in the upper right-hand corner, shows a picture of our regional leadership group. It was created to update and reflect what are the educational priorities for our states, the energy code, education priorities, everything that as a stakeholder group we felt we wanted to kind of raise the bar and really focus on schools as unique environments. One thing that I want to note is that through the update process, which includes not only the state departments of education, utility program administrators, facilities managers, et cetera, specifically for Massachusetts, as you'll see and Bill mentioned before, our original version of Northeast CHPS was created, version 1.0, released in 2007. But just last year, we released version 3.0. And we had many stakeholders in the Commonwealth that helped to update it, including the Mass Department of Energy Resources, the EPA Region 1. We had the Massachusetts Facilities Administrators Association and several facilities directors and managers and energy managers, architects, engineers, and health advocates, all making sure that we still maintained a high level of how we're going to build, construct, operate, and maintain our school facilities here, not only in Massachusetts, but throughout the region. I also wanted to just highlight that we have a number of supporting resources, including a companion O&M guide. Sometimes I call it the OMG, OMG guide. It's for schools and public buildings, and it's a pathway for taking your existing building and helping to put it on that pathway of high performance. And then in addition, we have a number of exemplars, such as the one that is on the right-hand side from the middle school. If you have a project that you have completed in Massachusetts, and we have a number of case studies, exemplars that are on our site, please be in touch. We would love to be able to feature your great work on our website. As I said, we have probably about 5 or 6 currently right now for Massachusetts. We also have one that we just finished on the Thompson Elementary School in Arlington. But we have a little template we can send you, and we'd love to be able to help promote the great work that you all are doing here, not only in the Commonwealth, but in the rest of the region. So that is my brief overview. As I said, I'm in Lexington, and I also have my colleague John Balfe here, and that's the Shrewsbury Sherwood School. I was trying to read it from where I was sitting. Thank you, Carl. And we're always happy to answer questions and help support your needs as we renovate and construct new schools here in the Commonwealth. Back to you, Bill.
Thanks, Carolyn. So at this point, we're actually going to move into the part of today's webinar, which is taking a look at what's changed from the last version of Massachusetts CHPS 2009 to what you'll find in the new version, the Northeast CHPS version 3. So starting off at the highest level, and this is directly related to the CHPS National Core Criteria and the version, the 2009 version of Mass CHPS, is that there's an overall standard framework associated with the points associated with CHPS, and I'm just going to mention a couple of things. First of all, the new point structure gives points for everything, and that includes the prerequisites that now have assigned points. And before we get any further, the reason for that, among others, is that it allows for assigning some value for the difficulty and importance of meeting just the basic requirements of the CHPS criteria. In addition to that, it enabled CHPS both nationally and regionally to be able to incorporate the priorities that I mentioned of healthy, productive learning environments, resource conservation, and environmental protection. It basically gave a vehicle for us to basically assign points within the overall CHPS rating system in accordance with those three priorities. And it also becomes important in terms of establishing some level of comparison between state versions of CHPS. Previously, every version of CHPS had a different number of points, and over time there was sort of a proliferation of the number of points, and we basically wanted to have more of a standard framework, and that really was a bridge that helped enable the basic transition from Northeast or Mass CHPS to Northeast CHPS. As I mentioned, there are 250 total points associated with the Northeast CHPS criteria. 200 of those points are assigned as part of the national core criteria, and then 50 points, or 20% of those, are actually distributed at either the regional or the state level. And those points can be allocated by giving additional points to the existing prerequisites or credits, or it can be by adding additional credits that are important regionally. And so, as Carolyn alluded to, and Carl through the MSBA policy, under the new CHPS Verified program, for recognition, you need at least 110 of those points out of the 250, and that includes meeting all of the prerequisites. And for major renovation projects, you need to get at least 85 of those points, and that's in recognition in part of the various project constraints that you'd face in upgrading an existing school, and also that certain prerequisites may not be achievable or relevant based on the scope of an individual project. In addition, this is a breakdown that looks at the comparison between the Northeast CHPS version that's now in effect and the 2009 MAS-CHPS. And while you can't make a direct comparison, what you can see is sort of a general comparison. And I'll just highlight a couple of things as part of this. First of all, the categories are generally the same, but there are some differences. There were not previously the same number of prerequisites. There are 4 more prerequisites in the Northeast CHPS criteria than in the previous MAS-CHPS version. As far as the overall percentage of points that are required for recognition under the new Northeast CHPS, of that 250 credit points needed, you only need 23% of the available credit points compared to the previous version, which required 28%. So that sort of offsets the number of points that you need to obtain from credits versus the prerequisites. This also includes integrated pest management, while new to the CHPS criteria, has been mandated in Massachusetts, and is something that schools already had to do. Now, looking at a little bit more in detail about the changes on the prerequisites from MAS-CHPS to Northeast CHPS version 3, one of the new prerequisites in Massachusetts is the establishment of basically a crime prevention through environmental design assessment. We'll talk about that briefly. It was felt that that was very important in the Northeast states, including Massachusetts. Some prerequisites, like green cleaning, were actually downgraded to a credit. The addition of integrated pest management, as I mentioned, there is a required benchmarking component. You either need to do Energy Star Portfolio Manager, you need to use the CHPS operations report card that uses Energy Star, or you need to basically do something that is based on the school's energy model. There's also a prerequisite for the use of Energy Star equipment and appliances. Some of the other things that were downgraded were construction, indoor air quality, and management, and ASHRAE 55 compliance was changed from a prerequisite to a credit. On the energy efficiency side, a couple of things that are of note. The one that I'll highlight is that there is actually a prerequisite to consider and take advantage of all appropriate and relevant, feasible utility incentives that are available. It's amazing at times how much money is left on the table by not taking advantage of this. So this is a way of sort of hardwiring additional incentives beyond the MSBA incentives for school projects. In terms of water efficiency, moving to a full irrigation system as a prerequisite for water efficiency, and actually adding commissioning of the irrigation system is an important element to conserving and using water efficiently. In terms of sites, there's the addition of site and building best practices as part of Northeast CHPS. Now, moving to the individual categories, I won't say a lot more on the things that I've already spoken to, but in terms of crime prevention through environmental design, that's really looking at the building and facility design aspect of creating a healthy and safe school. New credits that were added are enhanced integrated design that calls for additional meetings and documentation. That's largely relevant if you're using an alternative construction procurement method like design build or CM at risk or some other thing where you have additional stakeholders that have already been put under contract that become part of the design team. One of the great new features of the CHPS criteria in Northeast is the addition of a high-performance transition plan, which is actually a pathway for the recognition of phased renovation projects over time. So while many MSBA projects are going to be able to achieve recognition outright, there are other retrofits and maintenance improvements that may fall below that radar screen. In fact, there are repair projects that are actually part of the MSBA funding scheme that are not subject to the sustainability requirement. So in addition to a major renovation project being eligible for CHPS recognition, that compilation or that collaboration of projects over time can be recognized by CHPS by utilizing this high-performance transition plan. We've also expanded on the notion of using the school as a learning tool and have incorporated some specific opportunities for incorporating the design concepts actually into the curriculum in a meaningful way. And then we've added a district sustainability plan in addition to previous offerings for passing a high-performance resolution and or becoming a CHPS member. And basically this looks at school districts that go beyond the simple high performance of their buildings to embrace sustainability in an even more holistic way. Now, in the operations and maintenance or metrics category, a couple of things we've already talked about: integrated pest management. I've already mentioned the fact that performance benchmarking is a prerequisite in some form or fashion as part of Northeast CHPS. We also have a prerequisite for indoor environmental management plan, which is essentially the equivalent of using EPA's indoor air quality tools for schools program. Even though the tools for schools funding has evaporated, there still is a robust EPA program, and the use of an equivalent is what's called for here. New credits include basically post-occupancy training and transition, turning over the keys to the school from the design team. Some of that is actually taken out of the commissioning for emphasis here with the school. High-performance operations are new credits that basically would be additional categories of the CHPS operations report card in terms of acoustics, thermal comfort, lighting, and so forth. There are additional points for achieving that. And then on the green cleaning side, it has been downgraded to a credit. So that's what's new and changed in the operations and metrics category. On indoor environmental quality, a couple of highlights here is the MERV filter rating has been increased in Massachusetts from MERV 11 to MERV 11, from MERV 8 to MERV 11 as a prerequisite, and then the additional points have been ratcheted up from there to MERV 13. The flush-out alternative has been recast from being really more of an indoor air quality best practices to actually including a protocol for measurement similar to what's in LEED version 4, but with some different increased thresholds. Includes construction moisture management, additional credit for dedicated outdoor air systems, for low radon best practices and mitigation, for providing individual temperature controls in all classrooms, establishing for the first time lighting quality performance standards, not just lighting level standards. Some of them are generally applicable to all types of lighting, but some of them are specifically focused on LED lighting as it emerges into the marketplace, and improved acoustics requirements that really focus on incorporating some other elements for the sound transmission classes and a more specific testing protocol. And then finally, establishing a credit for EMF best practices beyond high power transmission lines. Now, in the energy category, this is really the driver, as Carl mentioned earlier, to the new revised Massachusetts School Building Authority policy. But from the CHPS perspective, we're really making a major paradigm shift. We're really moving from a beyond code percent approach to actually designing towards zero net energy. So this is right in line with things like Architecture 2030. We've also consolidated a lot of the previous energy individual credits or points into an overall energy index, and I'll be talking about that more. The points are awarded based on improvement over the IECC 2012 baseline. Both Carl and Carolyn have mentioned that. Renewable energy production is also included in the overall scale, but as a means of ensuring that you really focus on energy efficiency first before you start looking at renewables, there's a requirement that you can't get more than 18 energy credits for a project before you have an EUI of no more than 40. So that's really intended as an additional incentive to go after energy efficiency before renewables. And there's a new option, and I'll talk about this in the new slide, to actually cross-reference the Energy Performance Index, or the ZEPI scale, as a means of going forward adopting a single scale that, as codes change over time, we won't have to change the overall point system of CHPS. So looking at that a little bit more in detail, if you're not familiar with the ZEPI scale, it's basically a 100-point scale. You can almost think of it as the reverse of Energy Star scale. On Energy Star scale, you want to get 100 points. On the ZEPI scale, you basically want to get 0 points. And that basically means that you're achieving zero net energy. On the other end of the scale, the 100 points under the ZEPI scale is based on the CPEX median school, which is also the same parameter that Energy Star Portfolio Manager uses. And then various energy codes over time simply get indexed with where you are along that 100-point ZEPI scale. So we basically have shown here the ASHRAE standards over time. And then you'll notice on the right-hand column here, this is basically the CHPS national benchmark of IECC 2012 or ASHRAE 90.1 2010. And the ZEPI score associated with that is a little bit over 50. Now, under the new Northeast CHPS Criteria version 3, to get that additional 2% reimbursement from MSBA, basically that equals a new ZEPI score of 48.5. And over time, when Massachusetts Energy Code is adopted, like when Massachusetts moves to the IECC 2015, basically that would simply move you lower on the ZEPI scale depending on how that benchmarks across to that ZEPI score. And then you would simply get more points as part of the prerequisite for meeting CHPS. And so again, this scale is anticipated to be available for the duration. 40 points are available under the Northeast CHPS criteria that are basically prorated along this 100-point scale. Now, some additional features associated with the energy category of Northeast CHPS. We've revised the environmentally preferable refrigerants approach. It's no longer an outright ban on HCFCs. We continue to have a ban on CFCs, which is pretty commonplace now, but we adopt a more performance-based approach based on global warming potential and ozone depletion potential. As I already alluded to, there's a prerequisite associated with the with investigating all relevant utility incentives that are available for your project. In terms of new credits in Northeast CHPS, there are new credits that focused on enhanced commissioning and in particular building envelope commissioning. Well, you have many opportunities during the life cycle of a school to go and enhance the systems or reevaluate, to tune the systems through a commissioning, retro-commissioning, or recommissioning process. You really only have one opportunity to get the building envelope right. So for the first time, the CHPS criteria is recognizing building envelope commissioning. There are additional credits for advanced energy monitoring, advanced monitoring systems, renewable energy performance monitoring, actual looking at the performance of the renewables, not just the design. There are still additional credits for schools that can be appropriately ventilated by natural ventilation. And there's a new or maybe a back again credit for electric vehicle charging stations. Moving on into water, what's new in the water category include basically updating the indoor water fixture requirements to match the EPA Water Sense program. We've added a new credit for stormwater collection and storage, and for creating irrigation and an outdoor water budget for credit. On the site side, probably one of the most notable changes is that we've developed a siting guidelines option that utilizes the voluntary US EPA siting guidelines. Previously in CHPS, there was a California-derived siting guidelines available, but we've tried to come up with something that is more nationally neutral and useful throughout the country. We've added additional regionally relevant forms of human-powered transportation to include skateboards and skis. Again, fitness and well-being and getting to school without riding in a single occupant car. In terms of new prerequisites, that includes site and building best practices. New credits include locally native plants for landscaping criteria and a new credit for construction site runoff control. On the materials and waste management side, the baseline for construction waste management has been increased to 65%. Most construction waste management plans that we see with developed infrastructures can achieve 75, even 90% or higher. So that baseline has been increased. New credits include the incorporation of environmental product declarations, or EPDs, and health product declarations, or HPDs, in addition to the multi-attribute pathways that were available previously in Northeast CHPS. Now, in terms of a few features that are no longer available in the Northeast CHPS criteria that were previously offered in the Mass CHPS criteria, mercury reduction has been eliminated. With technological advances, it's become standard practice, so we've eliminated that. In terms of certified wood, we only accept FSC certified for most wood products, and NWFMA's responsible procurement program for flooring only. All other certified wood systems are no longer available. And then finally, the alternative fuel credit that was previously available is now available regionally as an innovation credit. So you can apply that as toward the innovation points that are available, but it's not a standalone credit any longer. Now, moving on at this point to look at some of the changes that are part of this transition between Mass CHPS and Northeast CHPS and the core criteria. I just wanted to highlight a few elements. First of all, CHPS is largely bringing in the review functions into CHPS. We'll talk more about that. CHPS basically provides upfront, when you register a project, project assistance in terms of how to navigate the process, as well as program and technical assistance in terms of the criteria and any technical issues that may arrive that are either site-specific or project-specific to a particular locale. The CHPS Verified program includes third-party reviews, both after the design is completed and after construction is completed. There are 2 phases within that. Those are both being managed in-house as we look forward in the short term. It includes a completeness screening as well as a complete compliance review. So for those of you who have done CHPS projects, one of the elements that we basically have brought in-house and that we're looking to streamline is that 2-phase process. The completeness portion really will be looking to make sure that the document is simply complete and has all of the elements and is ready for review, as opposed to being sort of a mini or pre-compliance review. Now, to introduce you to the CHPS Verified team, and Douglas is basically our primary point of contact for CHPS project registration and for answering any procedural questions that you may have. She'll also be your primary liaison once you've registered your project for managing the process along the way. Stephanie Mason, who I believe is listening in today, it will be responsible for answering technical questions and for actually performing reviews with additional technical support. One of the other changes to the CHPS Verified program is we have a new verified process, which is an upgrade to the Basecamp process. And so if you've not done a CHPS project before, this will all be new to you, and Ann can help you with that. For those of you who have done a CHPS project before, this is a new upgraded version of Basecamp. If you have any questions along the way, you can contact CHPS. Feel free to do so. You also get various credit interpretations as part of the process. There is a new simplified documentation process as well that really focuses on making the CHPS review more integral to the design process by referencing and utilizing wherever possible the construction documents, and includes the development of 2 full-size plan sheets, which are the primary workhorse pieces associated with the plan reviews. In terms of the fee structure, I'm not going to go into detail. We will be posting this webinar presentation online, and we'll be having follow-up activities in the coming weeks and months. But suffice it to say that we are actually simplifying the review fee process and the review fee system. So instead of having a bunch of factors that determine how much a fee is going to be for a project, if there's going to be a small project fee, there's going to be a project fee based on the project type and the recognition level being sought. There is no separate registration fee. You will simply pay the design fee at the beginning of the design process, and the construction fee at the beginning of the construction review. I'm not going to go into details on the fee schedule, but basically it is cost competitive, and I basically want to move to make sure that we have enough time for questions here as we're approaching our time frame. So basically we encourage people to register the project as quickly as possible, to involve CHPS early in the process and take full advantage of the tools and resources that are available. At this point, a couple of quick thoughts on why select CHPS for your project in the first place. I think the most relevant ones are, you can see here that the overall emphasis on CHPS is basically designing the school from the inside out, with approximately 1/3 of the points in Northeast CHPS dedicated to indoor environmental quality, and over 1/4 of the points being allocated to energy efficiency, which is in line with the MSBA policy. Focus on what matters first: the students, their performance and well-being. As I mentioned earlier, we have a proven track record of 60 projects in Massachusetts. This is a regional adaptation, so while it's a national overall framework, it's been regionally adapted to reflect the priorities of the Northeast region. It's even better for renovations. Both the prerequisites and minimum point recognition thresholds have been adjusted to reflect renovations, and CHPS overall is committed to reducing overall project costs. So at this point, I'm going to go into the opportunity to ask any questions, and I'm actually not seeing any questions so far. I would like to open it up to questions, so if you have a question, please go ahead and type it in at this point, and we will go ahead and answer your questions that you may have. Please go ahead and answer your questions. While you're typing in your questions, I'm going to go ahead and just highlight some of the resources that we've already touched on. If you have any questions before you register your CHPS project, go ahead and send them to verified@chips.net or call the CHPS office. We'd be happy to answer any pre-registration questions or help you with the registration process. Feel free to attend another CHPS webinar like the one we're having today. We will be having follow-up webinars on Northeast CHPS. There are other dedicated webinars that focus on other specific elements. There is one on the CHPS verified process called Getting It Right the First Time. There's also one, an intro to CHPS, and there's one on the CHPS operations report card. So I'm looking here. It looks like we do have a question here. I'm going to. So I've had a question about returning to the slides on why CHPS and LEED are advantageous for some projects. So I will go back to that slide in a moment while we wait for any other questions. I'll go ahead and back that slide up. So these are a few reasons why CHPS may be the best choice for your next MSBA policy. The focus on indoor environmental quality first, what matters to students and health and well-being, proven track record within Massachusetts and the Northeast. Basically, it's regional adaptation, its relevance to regional stakeholders and projects throughout the Northeast, taking into account the climate code and other environmental priorities. And it's even better for renovations, as I mentioned, and we're overall reducing the cost associated with a CHPS projects, whether it's the inclusive nature of the CHPS review fee or basically the integration with the construction project. So I'm looking at another slide, another question: where are the other educational slideshows available on the CHPS website? If you go to the events page, the tab on the top of the CHPS website, you'll basically see a variety of archived slideshows as well as additional information about each of the periodic webinars that we offer, so you're able to take a look at those there as well. Are there any other questions? Go ahead, feel free to type those in. And I think at this point we're going to move on to the CHPS video that I just mentioned. It's a brand new video. It's just being debuted today. And here we are with the final slide. We're going to do a virtual tour of Southeastern Regional Vocational Technical High School in Easton, Massachusetts.
The mission of the Collaborative for High Performance Schools, or CHPS, is to make every school an ideal place to learn. CHPS priorities are to protect student and staff health and enhance the learning environments for school children like us everywhere. Conserve energy, water, and other natural resources. and reduce waste, pollution, and environmental degradation.
Not just another construction project for us. It's about taking that school building and ensuring that we're creating healthy learning environments, not only for your generation, but for future generations.
Too much pollution, harming nature, plants and animals in danger. Let's make a change right now, 'cause we've got one Earth. Hi, my name is Brooke Beaver. I'm in 5th grade and a National Green School Society student. Hopefully you've heard my song One Earth and seen the video on YouTube. I wrote this song to make a green difference and spread awareness about things we all can do to help make the world a better place. The video for One Earth was filmed here at Southeastern Regional High School. This school is just one of the amazing CHPS verified schools located across the country. Let's take a tour of the school and look at some of its great features.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Sarno-Goldthwaite, and I am chair of the CHPS Board of Directors. I'm also with Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships here in Massachusetts. At CHPS, we're working to create ideal learning environments. We believe that our students matter, therefore our schools matter. We're working to transform the way that schools are designed, built, operated, and maintained. The CHPS Criteria rating system has been the regional standard for healthy high-performance schools in Massachusetts and in the Northeast region since 2006. Over 50 schools have been built in Massachusetts alone to date, and many more are on the way.
Our next stop on the tour will be one of our newly renovated science classrooms. This classroom has many high-performance features that Jake will guide you through.
The classrooms were renovated with good indoor environmental quality in mind. Many of the new floors around our school are made from recycled content. The paints and adhesive used throughout the building are low VOCs to keep the building's air healthy for people. Most of the classroom spaces have large windows which help to connect the indoors and the outdoors and can be opened whenever the weather allows. Each classroom is individually monitored for thermal comfort. If a room is uncomfortable, the teacher can contact the on-site facilities engineer to adjust specific rooms.
With over 1,000 students, Southeastern goes through a lot of water.
At one point, the water consumption was so high that we were told by the state that we would have to build a multi-million-dollar wastewater treatment facility. Many changes were made throughout the school, including dual flush toilets, waterless urinals, and motion-sensing sinks like the ones you see here. These changes and others allowed us to reduce our water consumption by 60%.
A library is a critical part of student learning and engagement at schools. Southeastern has taken their old gymnasium and converted it into an innovative media center. Here's Sam to tell you more about the media center.
Converting the old gymnasium into the new media center was a creative way to reduce waste and give the space new life. The floor of the old gym was left to provide sound insulation between the library and the cabinet-making shop below. High ceilings allow for suspended ceilings, which improve the acoustics. The media center was designed with student learning at the forefront. There are multiple learning spaces, including the reading areas, computer stations, and work tables.
The brains behind the building and its high performance are some very state-of-the-art and sustainable energy technologies. Here's Tabitha to introduce you to some of these great features.
One of the most substantial parts of this energy efficiency is this tri-generation system that you can see right behind me. This system burns natural gas to create electricity for the school. As the gas is burned, the school recovers the waste heat to heat the building. During warmer seasons, an absorption chiller is used to cool the building with the same system, and there is a 20,000-gallon thermal storage tank which allows chilled water to be stored overnight for use during the day. Another great thing about this system is that it provides electricity to the school in the event of a power outage. Throughout the building, there are many other energy efficiency and conservation measures in place. From motion sensing lights to LEDs, the school is always looking for ways to reduce energy consumption. These energy efficiency measures have allowed us to reduce our overall energy usage by approximately 1/3.
At Southeastern, we are lucky to have many green spaces, both on and around the building, that involve students in sustainability.
Here we have our garden beds and greenhouse.
In these spaces, students grow a variety of fruits and vegetables that we use in our school's culinary restaurant. The greenhouse allows us to grow food all winter long. On this end of the greenhouse, you can see our composting bins, where we turn cafeteria waste into organic fertilizer for our gardens. Our newest addition is an orchard.
One of the ways that we use our school as a teaching tool to educate people about sustainability and high-performance buildings is the Sustainability Center you can see behind me. Many features of our Sustainability Center were completed by students to teach them about green building practices and technologies. Some features of the Sustainability Center include geothermal systems, photovoltaics, and solar thermal. A wind turbine feeds renewable energy back into the electric grid. The rain garden captures and filters stormwater before it enters the wetlands behind the school. Our biobus travels to community schools and events to teach people about what they can do in their lives to live more sustainably.
So there you have it. This is a school to be proud of, and many more are coming on board. If you want to learn more about how your school can become a CHPS verified school too, just contact CHPS. Bye! This is our home, this is our planet, so I can't understand it. I see litter on the ground. Too much pollution, harming nature, plants and animals in danger. Let's make a change right now. 'Cause we've got one Earth, we've got to recognize this is